Hey folks, it's Marvin Cash, the host of the Articulate Fly, and we're back with another Casting Angles with Mac Brown. How are you, Mac?
I'm doing great. How are you, Marvin?
As always, I'm just living the dream, and it's kind of funny. We had the Northern Lights pretty far south, and I know a lot of people got excited about that, but we were trying to kind of talk through, why fishing has been a little bit funky, right? Because we kind of got out of that cold weather we had, but as you noted a couple weeks ago on your Instagram feed, and this is something we're seeing kind of everywhere, that hatches are a little bit off schedule or not happening. And, so we thought it would be a good idea to talk to folks about, what do you do when you go to the water and you think you know what it's going to be like and nothing is the way that you expect it to be? And, what's the strategy for putting some fish in the boat?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much a real scenario, these days. And it's like today was 0% chance of rain. And it's like, then you add that in there. And of course it rained all day. From as soon as we put in, it rained till we took out at 5:00. And I'm like, what happened to that 0%? That was the latest Doppler forecast from the Asheville radar. So, yeah, it's kind of funny. So that right there alone, I was kind of like a little bit shocked. Had Carhartts on and a Sims jacket. And I thought, well, if I'd have known it was going to rain all day, we probably would have put waders on. But I don't really like wearing waders this time of year, Marvin. So it is what it is. But it didn't really, we had really overcast skies and rain falling all day. So, I knew it'd probably be better up top, but we never saw anything rise or break water the whole day down the river. So we tried a lot of different things, and I kept going back to the dry fly and enticing stuff to come up by using the skating techniques. And you can, of course, dance it from far away by shaking the line and making it look erratic rather than just dead drift everywhere. And pretty much that's what everybody caught. And had a couple of boats out there for the trip, and the guys are all buddies from 30 years ago up in Wisconsin in St. Paul area. And that's what everybody basically ended up doing. So even though we tried all the other techniques, tried a little bit of nymphing, nothing. Water's a little off color, too, to make it all fair for the nymphing game. But yeah, so I figured nymphing wasn't really going to be it either. So there's a lot of boats around us that were all nymphing. Never saw them hook up anything, so I pretty much abandoned that within about 30 minutes. But yeah, it's funny how when you think something's going to go a certain way, then you kind of change. But I'll say this, usually in low light conditions like this with the, lead colored skies, whether it's a wet fly game up high near the surface or a dry fly game, but usually I'll bet up on the very top. I would put my best guess coming up to the top. So I don't have as much confidence in low light like that, saying let's nymph deep or throw streamers deep, So that's usually not where it's at.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Like I imagine probably the approach might be a little bit different, if you were wading versus in a boat. Because I would think, most people that fish nymphs out of a boat probably aren't as skilled at, animating the way that you talk about, fishing with like Davey or somebody like that. And so it's a little bit harder, to maybe, if you're in a run, to stand there and kind of work, jig and different retrieves. And you're like, well, that doesn't work. And you keep progressing. But might be a little bit harder to do with the average angler on a guide trip in a boat.
Yeah, I think it is. And it's like, yeah, it's still tricky even to animate, wets and dries up in the upper layer. You know what I mean? Because if it's something they haven't done a lot, I think that makes it kind of a learning curve on the fly. But then having something blow up and hit when it starts to skate, and then blam, they get a strike, and if it misses, and that's always that's a pretty good clue. But the big part of it is too, even with those, whether it's on the wet game or the dry, is to not react with the rod. Like, a lot of people, when they're not doing it enough, they want to do 100% rod movement when that happens. And I'm like, well, now we're not even in the game because the fly just got yanked away from the fish and you don't have any chance at catching it. So learning to do that with the line hand rather than the rod is a hard thing to break people of. You'll get people that fish 40 years that still rely on the rod, which means somebody never taught them to, use the line hand, is what that really means. But it's hard to break. It's hard for people to break. Then you're telling them, over and over, quit using the rod to set everything. Because the rod's, you know what I mean? So if they get excited and it's not there, then it's basically a backcast, isn't it? There's no chance of catching it. That's the reason. And the other reason, of course, if it did connect, it's also a lot higher likelihood of breaking off on 5 or 4X, isn't it? You know what I mean? Because if it's a little bit too aggressive, then blam, you just broke the tippet. So, but if you use your line hand and you get a nice constant bend in the rod, you got the fish on, win-win. So that's kind of the fun part about the upper layer.
Yeah. It's interesting too, though, right? Because, I mean, we were talking, and it's not just that hatches this year are late. It's just like some hatches that we would expect to see aren't happening.
Yeah, some of them I think are gone. I think a lot of the stuff that we used to see, I mean, I really think are gone. Like that post that I put up on Instagram a few weeks ago. I heard from friends over in the Blue Mountains in Australia. Heard from friends below Queenstown, all kinds of places across North America. But yeah, I think the sad thing about it, really, the one I posted that is the Mother's Day Caddis, because it was just Mother's Day yesterday, you know. And that's always been a really predominant hatch here in the park for the park streams, like all of them, like Hazel Creek, Nolan Creek, Forney Creek. We have that on every park stream since I've lived here. And the more Jimmy Estes brought it to my attention, you know, a couple of years ago, goes, Mac, I'm not seeing the larvae. Have you seen them? And I'm like, well, Jim, I hadn't really looked at them, because when I'm running trips, I'm not sitting there rock scounging looking at, you know, I'm not teaching entomology or anything like at Western years ago anymore. So I just assume they're always going to be there. And then sure enough, when he brought that up, I started kind of paying attention and looking out on the watersheds that are around me. And I can't find the larvae. I haven't found a single larva yet we used to have millions of them. So I think the bad news is I think that Mother's Day Caddis hatch is gone from here permanently. Because if we can't find a single larva, that tells you something.
Yeah, and is the Mother's Day Caddis, is that a case larva? So like, is that when you flip the rocks over and you see those little cases, or is it a stick builder?
No, it's a little trapezoid shape. It's a little brown. It's a little green worm in a trapezoid shape. And they go through like 11 to 12 instars, and it's about the size. This time of year before they hatch should be about the width of your little finger. You know where your fingernail is on your little finger. That's about the size. And those are the filters. So what they do is they attach the little silk thread on the rock. They come up and suspend. We used to get hundreds of them, like when you dry dropper years ago. Your nymph would catch on that silk line, so then you'd catch it on your hook. You know what I mean? You'd catch the little larva on your hook. So about every 5th cast years ago, when they were, you know, filtering in the water, you'd have to take that back off, and you'd throw back out, and you'd catch another one because of silk line. But yeah, that's how they would feed. They filter by using that little silk line, and they suspend in the water column, and they keep the silk line attached to the rock, kind of like a spider web. And that's the ones that I'm talking about are disappeared from here. So that's a bad sign, though, because they're real tolerant of pollution. That's the kicker. You know, so, you know, the mayfly's not as tolerant for pollutants. But when you start to lose like caddis species, then it starts to mean there's a bigger problem.
Yeah. And so to kind of back up, you know, to give people kind of a process, I know you ended up basically fishing, you know, wets in the film and dries today. But, you know, if you walk out and, you know, your current plan isn't working, kind of what's the progression and how rapidly should you work through technique and fly changes to try to dial something in?
I think the progression starts first with the conditions that you see, like if it's bright blue sky versus overcast sky. I think that right there is the same on the lake too, for trout. But on a river, if you know it's overcast, if you're going to nymph, then you're going to nymph high. You're going to keep try to keep, you know, the tabletop layer we talk about just from the surface down, say a foot. We're going to try to fish nymphs up high in the column. That wouldn't be a good idea to say, let's fish nymphs rolling the bottom on an overcast day with it like what we had today. So I didn't even go there, because that's what all the boats around me are doing. You can also learn a lot. Pay attention to the people around you. I mean, I do that a lot, guys. And if I look out and there's 4 boats and they're all nymphing a bobber with 12 feet of tippet, they're already fishing the bottom. And if you're sitting there doing your game and you notice, hey, they hadn't hooked a fish yet. It's been an hour. Then there's no point to go copying that, is there? So I'm saying I think there's a little bit of cat and mouse, like paying attention to the people around you too. Because if the game was on down there, then they'd all have bent rods. So, I mean, I have a lot more faith on overcast day, like I say, staying up in the top. So the changes I was doing was mostly based on that assumption, which is kind of like going back, a long time ago, like the gillies that are in Ireland and those places in the world. They've had that in their literature and in their repertoire for a very long time. And I think there's a reason that those, what do you call it, gut instincts is a good thing to pay attention to. First, it wouldn't be a good idea to go out there and change nets 20 times deep when you still haven't got a strike. Because it's not a fly pattern problem then, because we're talking about a DH program where the majority of them are hatchery fish. And so I think that's a big part of it too. You have, I don't remember, I didn't look at the schedule, but I know sometime in the past week they put 7,000 or 8,000 more on the section here through town. So that's a pretty high population density per mile of river. So basically the way out here on like a DH would work is once you're dialed in and doing the right thing, which is kind of just experimentation, like I said, from being cloudy. That's what happened toward the end. Once we were dialed in, they were getting strikes like every cast than the spot we were in before we got done today. And I mean, we had some moments like that where you know you're doing the right thing. How do you know? Because you're getting success every time you throw out, you're getting a strike. Whether you caught it or missed, it doesn't matter. You got a strike. That's kind of how I count it. I don't really care. Well, I shouldn't say I don't care, but whether they got it in or not is beyond my pay grade at that point. If they got a strike and missed it, I could care less that we got it in the net or not. Does that make sense? It's giving me the feedback that I want, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And then, to kind of turn it around, if you had a bright, sunshiny day, you would want to fish deep and on structure because the fish don't have eyelids and they're not going to be up at the surface because it's a little too bright, right? Plus predators.
Yeah. And then we'd go back and play the other game, about dead drift, licensing lift, jig, swing, and, hand crawl back up. There's 5 techniques to run your nip down deep. And it's like we'd sit there and play that game on a deeper level, which is a whole different kind of game than what I'm describing, what we did today. But it's just a whole different process. And that's why I guess the willingness to change, to kind of sort through that. But sorting through that, a lot of people would say, start out, fish deep, go through all that process first, and then kind of play around with the streamer for a little while, then play around with this a little while. No, what I'm saying is when it's these kind of conditions, I think you can filter to the answer a lot quicker than saying do everything that you know how to do. We're not there to do everything we know how to do. We're there to do what we know we need to do for the condition that we have. Does that kind of help?
No, it does. I just wanted to kind of boil it down so people can write that on a 3x5 card and stick it in their fly box, and they'll have that in their shirt pocket the next time they go out. And I know you wrapped up your last casting school until the fall a few weeks ago, but you probably have some kind of topical schools coming up throughout the summer, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have some. There's still some wet fly schools and there's some dry fly schools coming up. The next few months, there's a lot of specialty weekend type schools. Those are on the website, and yeah, those are a lot of fun because they just focus specifically into that, into that realm of tactics to perfect. Because a lot of people are like, well, isn't a wet fly, you just throw it and swing? It's like, no, if that's what you think of wet fly, then go sign up for the class. But that's what a lot of people think of wet fly. They think, well, Marvin, isn't that boring technique? We just throw it out and hope something jumps on. But that wet fly has as many techniques as dry fly or nymphing or anything else. It's just there's a whole array of things to put in the wet fly quiver that make it highly productive.
Got it. And, also, too, I imagine you probably, you're booking trips with you, and then also you run a handful of guides. If folks wanted to reach out and book a day with you on the water, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Probably the website at Mac Brown Fly Fish. Or, yeah, I'd prefer that because sometimes people will put something to Instagram or something. I don't really look at that as much. I'll answer an email a lot quicker than I will a social media thing. because I don't really look at the social media thing that often, Marvin. So I think the email's the best way off the website.
Yeah, well, there you go. Well, listen, folks, you owe it to yourself to get out there and catch a few. Tight lines, everybody. Tight lines, Mac.
Tight lines, Marvin.